Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Donito Burgess. I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at Tucson Audubon. I'm joined this morning by Keith Wallach. Keith is a wildlife photographer. I'm also joined by Gary Farber. Gary works for Hunt Video, and you're going to learn more about that. He's going to tell you about it. But I always want to start off all of our events by telling you why we do what we do. Here at Tucson Audubon, our mission is to inspire people to enjoy and protect birds. We feel very strongly that, by providing educational opportunities like this, we give you the tools to get out into the environment, see some of the wonderful birds in your area. And we feel like if you do that, you can't help but have that impressed upon you. And you're going to want to protect those places and those birds moving forward. And so with that, I'd like to go ahead and again, introduce Gary Farber with Hunts. I'll turn it over to him. He can tell you a little bit about Hunts and a little bit about Keith, and then we can start getting going. Go ahead, Gary.
Right, thank you, Keith. I'm just curious, anybody here go to the festival? Was anybody here at the festival? I know I saw Steve, but I saw anybody else? Uh,
Let's see.
right.
I
What?
believe everybody's muted, Gary.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think someone put in the chat. Yeah. Okay.
Irene and Julie were there.
They're coming in. All right. All right. So anyway, obviously some of you saw me at the festival. I know I talked to a lot of people there. So if you guys stop by the Hunt's table, thank you very much for stopping by and visiting the table and checking that stuff out. Hunt's, we're a company, we're based in Massachusetts. We ship all over the country. Really, what I strive on more than anything else is more the personalized service. And really trying to provide the best level of customer service for my customers and being there for all levels and not just being a salesperson, but really being a person that can help people out and service them and be available to them pretty much 24/7. So if you guys are looking for anything and need anything, feel free to reach out to me. Want to help you out, take care of you. Hunt also does a lot of trips around the country and around the world now. We do stuff in different parts of the country and different parts of the world. So you can check that up. You can check all that out on Hunt's EDU website, which I'll put down the information chat. But if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help you out and take care of all of you. We also do sell used equipment as well. So if you're looking for used stuff, you don't have the budget for new, we do sell used stuff as well that I can usually give you about 15% off on. So that's a little bit about me, what I do. I've also do photography a lot now. I did that in the last couple of years. I picked up photography and I'm shooting and I really love the photography that I'm doing. And I do a lot of wildlife, landscape, macro, sports, all that type of stuff. So I'll put my information down in the chat. If you want to follow me on Instagram and Facebook, you can do that as well. So without further ado, tonight I want to thank Olympus for sponsoring this program. I met Keith. I think I met you at the Florida Birding Festival in St. Augustine. So I want to introduce to Keith as and Olympus is sponsoring this program. If you're looking to upgrading Olympus stuff or getting Olympus stuff, I'll anybody who reaches out to me, I'll give you on top of any rebates going on, I'll give you an extra 10% off for this webinar. So feel free to reach out to me and you can get an additional 10% off for this webinar. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Keith. And again, thank you for Olympus for sponsoring this program and also being a great partner of the birding community overall. They've really stepped up in the last 3-4 years out of any other company and have supported it in huge fashion. So top gun. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Keith. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary. I have to deal with one small technical problem real quick, if you guys don't mind. Just give me 1 second here. Somehow my mouse is gone when I am presenting, so let's try this. There we go. Okay, so my name's Keith Wallach. I live in Central Oregon. I'm a wildlife photographer by trade. Birds and smaller mammals are kind of my area of focus. I've been photographing for about 5 years, but I have a professional background in graphic design and fine art. So I've always kind of dove headfirst into how to create impactful imagery from an emotional standpoint, and just getting people to think when they see my work. My work is derived from storytelling within the natural space. So I work with nonprofits, you know, nature centers, and just try to give them the ability to show beautiful imagery in their marketing and outreach so that we can all ethically enjoy birds and wildlife alike in many different forms. So a little bit about my backstory. You kind of never know where life is going to take you. I was on the fast track to playing collegiate baseball, was planning to get drafted by the Dodgers out of high school. And as soon as I got into college ball, things kind of took a turn. Unfortunately, I suffered a few major concussions and a shoulder surgery, and that completely changed my outlook on what I was going to do with my life. Leading up to this point, I had no real, fallback plan other than, well, I'm going to play baseball my whole life. So that concussion actually led me to be a lot more creative rather than analytical. I was falling back on a physical therapy major. I no longer could do chemistry. I no longer could do math. But what did happen was quite interesting. I could draw all of a sudden. I took an interest in design and art and writing. And honestly, it landed me in a great place, and I wouldn't change that. But I always like to put that in this presentation because I find that everyone's path to photography or birding or anything in this natural sector is really kind of not their first go sometimes. So I like to make this as relatable as I can. Initially, my photography journey started with hiking and landscape photography and just documenting the process in which I took to stay active after those injuries. So I started going out into the mountains. I got a dog, all of those things that kind of lead to this Pacific Northwest style life where I'm just constantly outside, constantly enjoying the world around us. It wasn't until a few years later, after I focused on landscape photography, that I kind of discovered birding and what that was the missing part in my whole journey of photography. Landscape was a blast. I love it. I still do it every now and again. And a lot of that led me to beautiful places, obviously. Mount Hood, the top right one is up in Canada. The bottom right is near Glacier National Park. And I started going to all these amazing locations, but there was always something missing. And that missing piece was that the satisfaction of a landscape photo generally happens in post-production or after you stack or after you long expose a lot of all of the technical terms that we use in photography. And it started weighing on me in the sense that I kept getting the same shot over and over again with a different mountain, a different type of light, but it was the same as everyone standing next to me. And so it didn't quite have that oomph that birding kind of does. I like to say that birding really found me. A long time ago, about 7 years ago now, 8 years ago now, I was on a landscape photography trip with a little group of people from Portland, Oregon that kind of all got together once every 6 months or so and just photographed the Milky Way or something like that, right? Well, there was a guy there named Desi, and he at the time was a Olympus ambassador. And he showed me the cameras, he showed me like what they're doing. And he said that he kind of fell in love with wildlife photography inadvertently because of these cameras. And so he was like, like you, I played baseball in college. Our stories are very similar. And so he let me borrow the camera and a longer lens. By no means was it, 600 millimeters or whatnot, but it was long enough to, shoot a random bird or a deer that was on the trail. And from that moment, I was kind of hooked. Birding was kind of the missing link that reminded me of what it felt like to play baseball again, where it's really trying to not only find the bird, identify the bird, but also photograph the bird in an interesting way. And in contrast to landscape photography, you kind of have that instant gratification of, okay, I've got the shot. I can say that I've seen this bird. And that never goes away because there's so many different species of birds and so many different ways to look at photography within birding. And I just quickly became very, very obsessed with bird photography and the bird's behavior. This really started out as a collecting species. I talk about this a lot with new birders, for instance. You start on this phase where you're collecting species of like just random different birds that are all around you, just in your neighborhood, for example. Then you start branching out more regionally. Then you start branching out more across the country. And that journey really kind of blended my love of hiking into these remote landscape areas, but also being able to photograph birds along the way. And so now it's kind of how to not only collect different species and identify new birds for me, but how do I evoke emotion through photography by photographing these birds? So the first step, right, is always how to find birds. Now, knowing that you all are part of, some form of birding or interested in birding, that's kind of the first step, is finding interest, finding the ability to, be okay with not seeing the bird that you wanted to see, for example. But it all really depends on the habitat that's near you. So some of the best birding you can do is right in your neighborhood. For me, I'm very lucky. I live in the Central Cascades near Bend, Oregon. So we have, most owl species of North America all within spitting distance. But we also have a lot of, I'm sorry. We also have a lot of woodpecker species, which are a lot of fun. So it's not so much about finding specific birds, but how to find the habitat around them. And that'll put you all in a very good place. Habitat plays an extremely important role in understanding the birds around you. From the coast to the mountains, the arid desert, all of them are going to be a little bit different, but finding them is obviously the fun part. For instance, when you're a new birder, you're not going to find an owl at the beach or a, eagle in tall grassland in the desert. But understanding habitats really lend itself to finding birds that you want to photograph or that you're trying to target. Habitat ranges, time of day, and all of the different types of species you can look for really help set yourself up for success. So it's not so much about going out and finding the specific bird, it's putting yourself in the right habitat at the right time of day. And that's pretty key to setting yourself up for success. For instance, most birds are most active at dawn or dusk. Unfortunately, those are also the times where your camera struggles the most. So finding habitats that you can set up in that really lend themselves to different birds throughout the whole day so that you can enjoy what's around you for multiple hours, not just from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then come back at dusk. I like to really set up during the day as well, because you never know what you're going to find. Migration season is a huge time of year that you can really set up the best chance of seeing some specific birds. This is an example of the migration season on the Oregon coast. There is about 9 different species of bird in this photo. from terns to gulls, and then there's a pelican floating around in there somewhere. But there is an immense opportunity to find awesome birds during migration season, and it's usually my favorite time to shoot. You all may already know this. eBird is a fantastic resource to find birds and find them to a specific location. The flip side to that is a lot of folks look for rare birds on eBird. And luckily, eBird does utilize some form of features where they're not hot spotting very rare birds. But this kind of leads me into the ethics side of this presentation, where that's kind of the most important part of what you can do as not only a birder, but as a bird photographer. Ethical wildlife photography and bird photography is very key in keeping our wildlife and birds safe, not only from us as humans, but from other people getting involved in photography at such a rapid rate of speed these days. We need to all be the beacon that these folks go to so that they understand how to ethically photograph birds or ethically photograph a moose in the forest without, having issues with their behavior. So with ethical wildlife photography, conservation, even with the best intentions, can still cause harm to the birds and wildlife. This is something that a lot of people say in the field that, well, I'm a conservation photographer. But it really depends on what the intent behind that is. People can very easily hide behind conservation to get closer to an owl species or a snowy plover on the beach or whatnot, and hide behind that. So even the good intentions of shooting that photo and talking about the issues that species has doesn't negate the fact that maybe you got too close or maybe you changed their behavior in a split second. And the important thing to understand is that this is something that you will always be constantly learning. It's not cut and dry. Every species is different. And even within the same species, every individual bird is different. So for instance, the photo you're seeing on the right, that is of a great gray fledgling that just branched out of the nest. And I shot this from probably 200 to 300 yards away through dense forest with camouflage on, no sound emitting from my camera and myself, anything. This is as wild as a juvenile owl can be in an area where humans generally don't frequent. So my intent behind these photos was to provide awareness for prescribed burns in this area for this specific owl nest. Fortunately, the Forest Service, I was able to identify where this was, and they were able to set up a perimeter, and these fledglings actually fledged and were successful. So while my photography was having good intent, the intent can turn to bad intent if I didn't get the Forest Service involved, for instance, or contact the appropriate folks. This nest would have been burned had I not said anything. So when it comes to photography, it really is about how can we help the species in need, not exploit them for our gain for either collecting a species, marking it down on your life list, or just shooting the photo that you want to shoot. I try to have intent behind all of that. This is a story about a snowy owl in eastern Washington. And this is a fantastic opportunity to talk about one of the biggest issues that plague the birding community and the wildlife community when it comes to photographing birds ethically, and that is private land versus public land. Public land, obviously, we want to practice leave no trace. We want to practice staying on trail, all of those things that we can learn from any type of, environmental book, environmental process, even the signs at the trailhead, right? Private land becomes a bit problematic because I've found a lot of photographers ignore private land, ignore posted signs just to find the shot that they want. And that just creates a lot more turmoil for not only the photographer and the landowner, but the bird itself, because now you're changing its behavior, you're causing a commotion around it, and now that bird may leave that area. You never know what they're leaving behind. Sometimes it's as bad as leaving a nest. So I was on a trip to Eastern Washington to try to track down some snowy owls. It was during an eruption year many, many years ago. They haven't been back since, unfortunately, so fingers crossed this winter they come back. But I was driving a public gravel road in the middle of nowhere, saw a couple of these owls roosting on a rock way off in the distance. And so I kind of pulled off the road just slightly so that I could scope them with my binoculars, maybe get my camera out. They were very far away. And I heard a car come up behind me, and it happened to be the landowner. To my surprise, this landowner got out of his car, approached my vehicle, and said, how can I help you? And I said, oh, I don't know if you know this, but there's some pretty rare birds off in distance, which I assume this is your land. Obviously I'm not going to get out because I don't want to, get on your land, trespass, whatnot. I just want to be respectful of what's here. And, those owls need their space anyway. But, it's just a cool thing. I think that everyone should have a chance to see birds like this, but everyone needs to respect the private land. And what I was trying to figure out is why this person felt the need to stop. And he proceeded to say that over the last 2 weeks, 400 something photographers have trampled his land to get to those owls and to get very close to those owls. He said those owls have been coming to his property for years. Every time there's an eruption year, they're there. And he said this year, unfortunately, there was a big fire, and so it cut down a lot of the trees nearby. And so now from the main road, you can see where these owls are. And he said that the amount of people that have no respect for his land, was extremely problematic. And he said, you're the first out of 400 plus people that have asked me about my land, about how I feel about it, about how you don't want to trespass. Everyone else trespassed and asked forgiveness later. And he said that I was minutes away from setting up a fence and posting everything on the exterior of the fence saying that photographers can't be here. And so after about an hour of speaking with this guy, he invited me on his property to photograph the owls, to learn about, the history of those owls in that location, and learn about his land and how he and his wife have lived there for 45 years. And it's just a, nice story to talk about ethics with, because all it takes sometimes is just to ask. You're going to be shocked as to what landowners are willing to do if you ask permission. Worst they can say is no. But the respect of private property is a huge issue, especially in the Pacific Northwest. And so, I have a standing invite to go back whenever I want to this property. I sent him a 40 by 50 inch print of that owl on the top right. And this is now a relationship I'll have for the rest of the time these owls decide to come to that location. So it's truly about just respecting not only the land, but the people that, own it. So I'll leave you with the 3 tips for ethical wildlife photography. One being always stay on public land or ask permission to go on private land. Don't trample over anything that might disrupt the ecosystem. Try to stay on game trails that wildlife will show you where to walk. Learning bird behavior before photographing them is very key. For instance, owls may bob their head in a circle if they feel threatened. Some owls may get smaller when they feel threatened. Some birds will simply just fly away. Some birds, like plovers and other shorebirds, will fake having nests and guide you away from their nest so that you're not getting close to their young. But what's really important is learning the behavior and diving into that behavior so that you can identify when and where you're getting too close, where you're changing their behavior, and then you can use that as a parameter to back up, to get closer, and whatnot. That way, we're not changing the behavior of these birds. During nesting season and with the rise in popularity of wildlife and bird photography, that goes hand in hand with the rise in social media. It's vital not to disclose nesting sites and really refrain from posting any young birds until they are fledged and left the area. Specifically with raptors and owls, it's very problematic when young birds or nesting sites are posted, and now everyone that's seen that really wants to go photograph it, which is a double-edged sword because we do want more interest in this. We want more people birding. We want more people photographing rare birds, but at what expense? And that's always going to be the question is, at what point do photographers and birders just need to leave the birds alone? Now we're going to get into some photography stuff about creative bird photography. And, this is where I differ from a lot of photographers. For years and years and years, I prescribed to the age-old idea that you have to follow the rules of photography. Now, those rules are generally passed down from, very seasoned, amazing photographers in Nat Geo, so on and so forth, and classically trained studio photography and pros in the field that really do things one way and one way only, and that's putting the sun behind your head and shooting it a low f-stop at f8 and getting everything tack sharp. And well, that is exactly the opposite thing that I do. So many times you'll want to do these generic rules of photography, and kind of what I just touched on. These are rules that will put you in a great place to get a photo like you see of this plover, where it's lit from the front, it's stopped down, and you're freezing the frame. You're not playing with any type of, creative light. You're not playing with any type of creative shutter speeds or anything with a low aperture, things like that. These are generic photo rules and guidelines that will help you reach these documentative photos. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not going to end up with good results. These are all examples of photos that are taken with those general rules, where you're stopping down, you're using compression in the lens, everything is lit from the front, and they do yield very sharp, pleasing results to the eye. And I do love photos like this. However, I differ from many people in this photographic community, where I much prefer the light behind my subject. Backlight is something that I have focused on for years now, and it's why I strongly believe that breaking these generic rules and breaking the rules of photography that have been around for so many decades creates so much more visual intrigue and storytelling into these photos and evokes more of an emotional response from the viewer. as you can see with the eagle on the right, the light is coming in directly behind him, illuminating the feathers, putting a golden glow around the edges of the frame, and you can feel like you're in that moment. When you look back at these, yes, you still feel like you're in that moment, but there is less of a moment in them. It is much more of a, this is a beautiful frame. I shot it this way and I edited it that way. Where backlight gives you a lot more playful ability to tell a story and show that actually that eagle was about to land on a fish right on the water, where I was set up photographing something else down the beach. I turned around and the eagle landed. And so it really shows and tells more of a story. And that's exactly what I'm after with my work. So how can you do this too? When trying to use backlight, you really want to push your own work. Any photo that you've taken, all that you've had to do is move over left or right or side to side, and maybe it's now backlit or side lit enough to evoke that emotion. So how to do that in the field. This is kind of a bit more of the technical side of backlight and how to use it in your photography. The biggest thing is using exposure compensation. And I am more than happy to dive into the more technical side of what that means and how to use it in the Q&A shortly here. But let's just keep this as an overview for right now. Exposure compensation will put you in a better place to utilize this technique without messing with a ton of different settings. You're going to want to expose for the highlights. So in this photo, it comes out very, very dark when you photograph it in the back of the camera. The big thing is not overexposing the highlights so it retains that orangish glowing color. In very tough light, you want to use manual focus. Sometimes your camera is not going to want to focus in these kind of settings. So using manual focus kind of can override what your camera is unable to do. The other thing is to be eye level with your subject. It really helps with not only storytelling, but it also helps with how that backlight is perceived in the frame itself. And the next two are kind of just image stories that I like to share at the end of this presentation that kind of show how a backlit photo can really showcase what you were shooting that day. This is a snowy plover that was hatched about a day before I shot it. The area in which I shot this on the Oregon coast was an area of very special concern to the local nonprofits that I was working with. And so I actually had somewhat of special access to get into this area ethically without, changing these birds' behavior. I would go out day in and day out for 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, while watching these plovers try to get their eggs to hatch. They had 2 failed nests and the third was finally successful. And I have probably 150 other shots of this same individual bird, but not in this light. And I can tell you that this is a photograph that I will cherish forever because it shows that story. It shows that I sat there and laid in the cold, wet sand for hours and hours and hours, waiting for the sun to come up. And right when it did, this plover stood up and stretched. And because of the light, because of the rim light around the feathers, it really tells that story. And it, to this day, will probably be my favorite shot that I've ever taken. So the trial and error is a huge thing. This is a shot that took 150 to 200 frames of error before I was able to get this shot. Some of them were exposed slightly too high, some of them too low, some of them at an angle where the camera didn't pick up focus, some that were just not the right light. And it's the perseverance through all of that that really makes this photo what it is for me. Now we're going to have a little bonus photo that really shows what backlight is capable of doing. And I know this is not a bird, this is a sea lion, but I was hiking on a cold day and it was right on the coastline in Oregon. And I kept hearing this noise, like a very odd noise that I wasn't expecting to hear. And I looked up and a sea lion popped up. Now, I knelt down into the reeds that were blowing back and forth. And what I realized is that even though it was the middle of the day, quote unquote, I mean, it was probably about 10 a.m., 8, 9 a.m. Even though backlight, for all intensive purposes, was gone, sunrise was over, sun was high in the sky. This is where you can get very creative, even in the middle of the day, photographing things. The trees on the background were so tall and so dense that the sun was piercing through them, even though the sun was high in the sky. And so all I had to do was change my perspective from standing to kneeling or laying down, and it was a completely backlit scene. And because of how sea lion's fur is wet, you get this beautiful rim light around the image. And to be honest with you all, I just really lucked out that it breathed right at the right time, and that breath was caught on camera as well. But this is what backlight is capable of, and it's a really fun technique to do. I hope all of you try it, and it really evokes more emotion into the scene. It shows what that moment truly was from a different perspective. And with that, I will open it up to some questions. I wasn't able to see things come in from the chat while I was presenting, but I am more than happy to answer any questions you guys have, or we can look through the chat and see if there's any. But thank you all for being here, and it was great to present to you guys.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Keith. Those backlight images are breathtaking. Really appreciate that perspective. I don't have anything in the chat. There may be some people that asked, but I just, for me, a couple of the things of the highlights that I really enjoyed was, when you talked about the intent behind your photographs. I really enjoyed that. That's not something that we hear a lot. A lot of our events tend to be very technical and, a lot of specifications, and you went into that, which was great. But I love that you talked about that first part about thinking, why are you taking that picture? And I also love that you hit upon the importance of respecting private property. We've been affected by that down here. I mean, as you know, we have a ton of public lands with a ton of places to go see, but we've actually lost access to a few different places because people would not respect the rules set forth by the landowners.
Yep.
And it's a big, big loss. And to tell you the truth, I don't blame the landowner one bit.
No,
I've seen bad behavior firsthand, and you're right. It gives us all a bad name as birders. It makes people think a certain thing about us. And so again, I just want to agree with Keith that while we're out there, whether just birding or photographing, it's important to remember that we're setting that example, not just for new birders, but for people who aren't birders. We're basically defining what birders are for them. So that's a really important thing to remember. So I'm really happy that you touched on that. So let's see. So if anybody has any questions, let's see. So far, a lot of thank yous in the chat. Yeah, like Karen said too, that was kind of what I was saying. I really enjoyed, Karen in the chat said your talk has given me a new perspective as I head out to observe. Like I said, I don't want to speak for the other people, but I think that's what I'm going to take away from your presentation today is that change of perspective and thinking outside the box. I'm not a gifted photographer at all. I'm very new. And so I tend to basically almost use those three rules as a crutch,
Right.
and I don't allow myself to think outside of the box like that. So I think this is going to give people a great perspective.
That's great.
All right. If anybody would like to ask Keith a question, you can either raise your hand by hitting the reaction button down low, or you can just feel free to unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. And the other thing is too, if you're like me, a lot of the time, some of your best thoughts and questions come as soon as the presentation ends. So just as a reminder to everybody, I will be sending out kind of a recap email a little bit later, as soon as I can get this uploaded. In that, I'll have links to Hunt's photo and video in there. I'll CC both Gary and Keith on there. So if you want to reach out to them with any questions, you're free to do that. And then another thing I'll do, also because Keith kind of mentioned eBird earlier, I think sometimes birders just kind of assume everybody knows what eBird is and utilizes it, and I've learned that's not the case. So what I'll do is we actually had another volunteer do basically a two-part eBird tutorial. And so I'll just go ahead and link that as well in case, it's just a good resource to have. Okay, Karen came in with a question real quick. Keith, Karen asks, you mentioned totally quiet equipment. What do you use and what did you use when you were first starting out?
Yeah, so I've used OM System for a long time now. Previously, Olympus cameras. That was rebranded about 2.5, 3 years ago now. So I use the OM1 Mark II and the 150 to 400 lens. It's on a micro four thirds sensor, so that will get you out to about 1,000 millimeters full frame equivalency. It's a mirrorless camera. So what that means is you can shut off the shutter noise. And so the lenses are so quiet that you don't even hear the focus rings going. And the camera is silent when you put it in that mode. So that's by basically shutting off the electronic shutter, and it's just going. So super beneficial setting that OM System cameras have. A lot of other camera companies have that as well now, but the key is that can't happen unless it's a mirrorless camera. The DSLR cameras actually have a mirror that's slapping the sensor, and that's that sound you hear.
Thank you for that. And Irene has a question. Do all mirrorless cameras support shutting the mirror?
So mirrorless cameras don't have a mirror. Basically, it's just, I'll just grab one, hang on. Basically, these cameras don't have a mirror in them at all. So when you open them up, it is just a sensor. There's no mirror that flips up and down. So when you're hitting that shutter button, basically it's all electronic in the camera itself to create those frames.
Thank you for that, Keith.
Totally off the chart question, but has nothing to do with birding. Well, it does a little bit, but do you know, since I didn't know you were a baseball player and that type of thing, but do you know who was a really good wildlife photographer now that played for the Seattle Mariners for a long time and was a really nasty pitcher?
Randy Johnson.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's
yeah.
a really good wildlife photographer right now. He shoots all Canon.
I would be lying if I didn't daydream about meeting the big unit out bird. Yeah. All right, let's see. So no more questions in the chat right now. Just give people one more second if you want to ask a question. I don't want to cut you off. But if not, like I said, again, if you think of something later, you can either reach out to me and I'll get a hold of Keith or Gary, or like I said, I'll CC them on the email I send out later today so you can reach out to them as well. So if there aren't any more questions, I just want to thank Keith. Like I said, I really appreciate you coming and doing this today. I want to thank Gary and Hunt's Photo. Gary sets all these up for me. He makes my life very, very easy. So I appreciate you, Gary. And so, yeah, with that, the last thing that I always like to do is I just ask everybody at the end, go ahead, unmute yourself, tell Keith thank you, tell Gary thank you, and then we'll go ahead and wrap everything up.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Of course, thanks so much for everyone coming out and enjoying
Thank you
this.
very much. Beautiful, beautiful images.
Yeah.
Thank
Awesome. Excellent. Well, perfect. Well, again, thanks everybody for being here. And remember our purpose and our mission. We are out here to inspire people to enjoy and protect birds. So I think today's presentation was going to go a long way in that. And again, Keith, I can't thank you enough. And I really appreciate everybody being here. And I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Take
Thanks.
care.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one. Thank you.
All right.